Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1035A, and today's date is July 29th, 2016, and the title of the episode is U.S. Economic Growth Continues to Decline, the Collapse Accelerates. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Let's head out to Greece, and we've been talking about Greece and how more and more debt doesn't improve the economy. And we're not rocket scientists. We just looked at the entire situation. We used common sense. And we said, piling more debt on a country does not spur economic growth. Now, there was a paper that was published this month, and the IMF came out and studied the relationship between GDP and sovereign debt restructuring using data from 1970 to 2010. Its main conclusion said that the central finding of this paper is that sovereign debt restructuring with external private creditors can affect per capita GDP growth in the years after the debt restructuring. Really? They needed a whole study on this. I mean, just think about this for a second. Take your own finances. If you went out and you piled on more and more debt, using credit cards, keeping your revenue stream the exact same way, what happens? Well, it cannot be sustained. Well, that's exactly what happens. In a country, when you pile on the debt, you tell the government you need to lay off people, cut programs, lay off some more. Less revenue is going to be coming into the government to pay for this loan. And if they can't pay for the loan, they need more of it. It's a very simple thing. But when they did this study, they really didn't include Greece in 2012 in their analysis. Because if you really think about it, this is the largest sovereign restructuring in history. So they didn't even include that, because if they did include that, it would show that this whole system that they're talking about right now is a complete disaster. So we can see right now that whatever the central bankers are doing, it will not help any of the economies. All it will do is add debt, just like in the Eurozone. We see the economic growth there in the Eurozone. Well, it is in half in the second quarter. France has ground to a halt. Unemployment is a little bit above 10% right now. Of course, those are the official numbers. I'm sure if we recalculate it and get rid of the manipulation, those numbers are going to be much, much higher. But we can see right now, of the 19-country bloc, they rose only 0.3% quarter on quarter in April till June, slowing from the 0.6% in the first quarter of this year. So what we're seeing right now is we're seeing a slowdown. Everything is slowing down, and it's getting worse. Now, of course, governments like to manipulate their numbers, just like the U.S. We talked about this before in other reports. And we know that the unemployment numbers are much, much higher. If you go back to 2008 to this point, do you see that the Eurozone has gone absolutely nowhere with the creation of money from the ECB, with QE, with buying corporate bonds, negative interest rates? Just think about this. What they needed to do to go nowhere, to increase the debt. So they increased the debt, and they had to do all these things just to sustain it. Isn't that what the United States is doing? Adding more and more debt. And what are they doing? They're going out looking for revenue to keep this going. That's why you have FATCA. That's why you have GATCA. This is why you have Obamacare. This is why they want a carbon tax. Because it's getting harder and harder as more people lose their jobs, their full-time, high-paying jobs. They're getting these part-time jobs, or a lot of people aren't getting work. The revenue stream is drying up. They're having a tougher and tougher time keeping this system afloat. I mean, Microsoft, they're planning to lay off another 2,850 people. And we've been looking at all the economic indicators. People are tapped out. They don't have the jobs. They're not spending the money. Retail is contracting. Housing, it is declining. And what we're seeing now is things are starting to accelerate, where everything is starting to fall apart very, very quickly. Now, the Chicago PMI, it dropped modestly in July from 56.8 to 55.8, better than expected of a 54. But very interestingly, we know that GDP has been tumbling. And it is odd that Chicago PMI did better than expected, because production, new orders, they're all declining in July. So what we're seeing right now is that all of this doesn't make sense. Now, there are certain areas that they continually manipulate, certain areas where the manipulation is not working. We see the Baltic Dry Index. It has declined by 9 points. It's down to 656 right now. And the economy here, it is not growing. Now, Wall Street and everyone else, all the central bankers, they thought this economy was going to grow by 2.6%. Now, we know the IMF, the US, the Fed, they all come out and say, and they make these ridiculous predictions, and they never come true. Oh, the economy is going to grow by 3%. It's going to grow by 3.5%. And all they do is they revise lower. And here we are. They were expecting it to grow by 2.6%. But guess what? The economy grew by 1.2%. Now, remember, this is the manipulated number. Strip out Obamacare, strip out inventories, strip out research and development. These are all manipulation in the GDP. We would be in the negative range. Now, interestingly, the first quarter GDP, well, that was slashed from 1.1 to 0.8%. This economy is dead in the water. And what's even more interesting is that the U.S. is admitting, yes, we manipulate GDP. We do this many times during the year. And the Department of Commerce, they announced it would seasonally adjust last year's first quarter GDP, not once but twice, in order to get better results. So the government statisticians announced that they have found evidence that efforts to adjust the country's measure of economic growth for a seasonal fluctuation have not been fully successful. The solution was to test all monthly GDP source data series at both monthly and quarterly frequencies. So we can see right now that there's a problem with GDP. Their manipulation is not doing what they thought it was going to be doing. And they need to push this up even higher to convince everyone. I mean, these aren't real numbers. These aren't really what the United States is doing. It's all fake. Just like unemployment, just like the retail numbers that the government puts out. If you actually go to each one of the stores to see what their sales are doing, that is different. But we can see that the government continually manipulates all the data, but they still can't get the revenue in to pay for their debt. And many of the people around the world say, you know something? I can't be paying tax in the country that I work and to the government the U.S. government at the same time. It's just not going to work. So we see more and more people renouncing their citizenship. Actually, 17,359 Americans have renounced their citizenship under Obama. Because it's becoming more and more difficult. Now, something very interesting. It looks like Switzerland is exporting gold to the U.S. In the past, U.S. was exporting gold to Switzerland. Now the tables have turned. Because in May, the Swiss exported a record amount of gold to the United States. How much gold? Quite a bit. About 20 metric tons in May of 2016. Now, this is very interesting because in the past, we didn't see anything like this. We saw like maybe 1 metric ton, 0.26 metric tons, 0 going back to 2015. And then all of a sudden in May, we saw this happen. What does this mean? Are people understanding what's going on here? Are the wealthy saying, I need gold? Is that why it's flowing into the United States? Because we know as the dollar devalues, as it implodes, we know the system is going to collapse. And those who are in the know realize you must have silver, gold, hard assets. Holding on to paper is not going to help. Maybe in the short run, when it first happens, people will still be accepting cash. But of course, as we know, when inflation hits, just like in Venezuela, it will become very difficult to keep up with the inflation. And this is why you should have, a couple thousand on hand if you have the ability to do this. I know many people don't. If you can keep 100 on you, or keep items that you can barter with, that might even be a better solution because people always use food, water, medical supplies, bullets. If you have gold and silver, hold on to those because those will be used later on. So we see Monti Paschi. Well, it looks like the bailout is not going well. This bank has failed its stress test. And we know these stress tests, they're just put out there as a cover to convince everyone that the banks aren't insolvent. But we know they are. We know they will not be able to handle what is coming. And this is why they created the bail-in documents. They know this, but it looks good in the corporate media. They passed all their stress tests. But what's very interesting is EU's Juncker said that the banking sector in Italy and elsewhere in Europe will be protected, and the European Commission will do everything to prevent a bank run. Well, that's very interesting. Is he worried about a bank run? Is he worried about the system collapsing and people running to the bank trying to get their money? It seems to look like that. And this means they will shut down the bank. This means they will do a bail-in. This means they will put in capital controls, not just for the Italian banks, but any European bank that falls into this. And many of them are going to. Now the Fed, it looks like they are preparing for negative rates. I know they keep having the talks about raising the interest rates. But in a congressional testimony last February, a member of Congress asked Janet Yellen if the Fed had legal authority to use negative interest rates. Her answer was this: in the spirit of prudent planning, we always try to look at what options we would have available to us, either if we needed to bring in negative rates, we might have to do that. Yellen says when she looks at negative rates in Europe, Japan, they actually seem to work. They have some type of an effect. So we fast forward a few more weeks to Yellen's June 21st congressional appearance. She stated that the Fed does have legal authority to use negative rates, but denied any intent to do so. Very interesting. So she went from February stating legal issues. In May, unwilling to state the Fed had legal authority to go negative. In June, Yellen had no doubt that the Fed could legally go negative. Coming up next month or the month after, she'll most likely call on negative interest rates, because where we're headed into a collapse situation, and the central bankers will have to go negative to keep this system alive. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.